il y a Raphaël qui vient d'arriver. Et ça
Ouais.
commence à arriver. Yeah. What I was saying is that this one is a little bit less. It's not fully organized, like in terms of like text and everything. It's not really a text study. Um, so it's more kind of like a freestyle. I'm gonna talk about ideas. I'm gonna still bring some text, hopefully, so we can start from the text. And I'm gonna bring some ideas. Many of the ideas are linked to some text, but I just didn't bring the text. It's not just like coming from me. But I think the main discussion or the main topic is so Pesach is coming up, and the idea is what does Pesach mean for us today, and how can we make that upcoming holiday somehow somewhat special and somewhat trying to understand maybe something more than what we usually know about Pesach. Because what we most of the time for most of the people, Pesach is this amazing holiday with first it starts with a lot of work, like cleaning up the house, and we cannot eat bread, we cannot eat anything that is leavening. We cannot. There's a lot of things that we cannot do, and it's also associated with like the big seder and family getting together, eating the matzah, and all of that. But what is behind that holiday? What is the message? And the way I wanted to start is first to describe how Pesach came about in the Torah, how they talk about Pesach, and what they used to do. So how it came, and this is the text. It's a long text. It describes pretty well the whole order of Pesach. You don't necessarily need to go through it, but if you want to read it later, it's Exodus 12 to 120. And the first time that Pesach came about, it was when the people of Israel got out of Egypt, just before they got out of Egypt. So just to give the background again of the story, which I think we all know, but anyway, we can summarize the background. The people of Israel were started to be the sons of Jacob, one of our forefathers. We had Abraham, Isaac, Jacob are the three forefathers. The, Jacob's had 12 sons, and they all are called the people of Israel. They are the tribe of Israel. And the first book of the Torah describe the history of everything, and it's Genesis, and it ends with the sons of Jacob with their families, which represent about 70 people. I mean, exactly 70 people. It's a count in the Torah, getting in Egypt, and they are going to get into Egypt, and that's how they start their journey into Egypt. From a tribe of like 70 people, they grow and grow and grow and grow, and they become a whole nation, basically. I don't know exactly how many people, but millions of people. And as they start to grow, at first they came to Egypt in a very friendly way. Joseph was one of the brothers. He's very well into the system of Egypt. He's like the viceroy, and they came to get food because there was no food in Israel. At the beginning, they come as friends. They are very much welcomed by the Egyptians, by the Pharaoh. And when Joseph dies, the new king come, and it start to be treating the people of Israel not in the same way. And he start to make them work and to basically bring them to a state of slavery. And this episode of slavery in Egypt will go on for about 200 and something years. So this is the context, and they grow as the people in Egypt. They become slave, and we'll see what exactly it means to become slave. But in the Torah, they describe a lot of different things. And at some point, Moses come about in this journey. He's seeing God, and in like a famous episode is in the desert, and he sees like a tree that, like the bush, the incandescent bush, etc. etc. I don't need to get into details. He gets kind of like an awakening, a call that it's his mission to get the people of Israel out of Egypt. In order to get them out of Egypt, there is a series of events that we call the plagues, or we can call them miracles, but there are the famous 10 plagues of Egypt. So he goes, Moses go, the story, God says to Moses, you're going to free the people. Moses say, but I can't, I'm not capable, they're not going to believe me, blah, 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 blah. They have a lot of back and forth discussion. And God said, okay, you're going to go, you're going to tell them this. Then you're going to go, you're going to prove them that you're coming from God, and this is what the name that you're going to use to show them that you talk to me. And the sages of Israel, the people of Israel will know that I am God. And all this back and forth is fascinating. It's not the topic right now that I want to discuss, but really at some other point we can check this discussion. We can learn a lot on ways to I think ascend to discover God in our day-to-day life through that exchange between Moses. But that's a different topic. And in that back and forth, one of the things that God says is that you're going to go to Egypt and you're going to do this miracle. And what's going to happen is that Pharaoh is going to want to let you go in order to stop that plague / miracle. But I'm not gonna, he's gonna want to let you go, the plague is gonna stop, but as soon as the plague stops, his heart is going to harden again, and he's going to change his mind, so he's not going to let you go. And you're going to go back and forth 10 times. And at the 10th time, the last plague, I'm going to make him like let you go for real. So it's an interesting conception and idea, but again, this is just the background so far. So the plague, the first one is going to change the water into blood. So he's going back. It's pretty famous. He's standing by the Nile. He tells to Pharaoh, let my people go. If you don't let them go, I'm going to turn the waters into blood, but only for the Egyptians. Pharaoh is like, I don't care. I'm not going to let you go. Moses go back to the Nile, change the water into blood. After days that no Egyptian can drink any water, and Pharaoh is like, okay, I can't anymore. Just make it stop. I'll let you go. Moses go back to the Nile, make it stop. The water go back to being water, and Pharaoh is like, never mind, you stay, and he makes the work even harder. So this is going back and forth every time, and that happens for the 10th plague. Now, right before the last one is the killing of the firstborn, of the Egyptian firstborn, and that's number 10. Number 9 is darkness, choshech in Hebrew. Right in between darkness and the firstborn, God tells to Moses, this month, this is the month of Nisan, on the first day of that month, I want you to gather the people and to tell them that in 10 days from now, you have to take a baby goat or a baby sheep. And on the 14th of the month of Nisan, you're going to sacrifice the baby goat or the baby sheep. You're going to kill it. You're going to sacrifice. You're going to take the blood. You're going to put the blood on the doors, on the mezuzot. This is the ancestor of mezuzot. And during the night between the 14th of Nisan to the 15th of Nisan, which is full moon, middle of the month, you're going to eat the meat of the sheep or the goats that you sacrificed. You're going to eat it with matzah, and you're going to eat it with maror. Maror is the herbs, right? And that sacrifice, in Hebrew, sacrifice is called korban. That sacrifice is the korban Pesach. And that is historically the origin of Pesach. And that's how Pesach was celebrated back then. So the first time when they got out of Egypt, then the following year, then they didn't do it for like 40 years. But then when they got back to Israel and they had a temple, this is how they were doing Pesach. You will find a baby goat or baby sheep. You will sacrifice the animal on the 14th. You will grill it, and they're very precise. You have to be grilled and da da da. You would eat it with matzah and maror. And this was what Pesach was about. So it's kind of different from what we do today. First, we don't have sacrifice anymore. That's the main difference. We don't have I think, sacrifices. So historically, that's what the Korban Pesach, what we call Korban Pesach, the sacrifice of Pesach, that's how it came. Now the name Pesach has multiple meaning, and one of the meanings is to skip. And basically, what happened is that God said, "You put the blood on the door, so when I would come in Egypt to kill the firstborn, I will know where to not enter. So if I see blood on the door, I know it's a house of somebody from the tribe of Israel. So I'm not going to get into that house, and I won't kill the firstborn." So the whole story is very strange, and it has a lot of like questions around it. But anyway, that's the story. Okay, it raises a lot of questions. First, I think we don't really understand, I think nowadays, especially with our level of consciousness or evolution or however you want to call it, or regression, I don't know. We don't understand the role of a sacrifice. Right? We cannot really understand how killing a baby goat or a baby sheep would be like such an holy act. We don't understand, why, for example, putting the blood on the door, why do we need that in order to make a difference between the people of Israel or the Egyptian? Like, if God is supposed to come and kill, like, he doesn't really need to see the blood on the door. It's like, he should know better. But even the idea that God will come and kill, it's a weird idea. So it's a lot of question. But again, just opening, because we're not going to necessarily tackle all of that right now. One thing that is interesting to know is also that the matzah, that today is really one of the symbols of Pesach, and it is one of the symbols of Pesach, but the matzah was eaten in the temple with every sacrifice. So back in the days, they were doing sacrifice all the time. Every morning, every afternoon, every time you had a scene, every time like you had like a list of like so many sacrifices. Basically, the holy temple was almost like a slaughterhouse. They were killing animals day and night, all the time. Blood everywhere, and it's like it's by itself it's strange, because many times we think the holiest of the holiest places, like the high priest, is all in white, and he has this beautiful like gold and stones, and he prays and he connects to God. But concretely speaking, he was killing animals, like, I don't know, like hundreds and thousands of them every day, and like getting the blood and pouring the bloods everywhere. But anyway, the matzah, every time you would do a sacrifice and that the sacrifice needed to be eaten, you would eat it with matzah. Also with bread, but also with matzah. So the fact that we eat matzah here is not necessarily specific to Pesach. The fact that we don't eat bread is specific to Pesach. And the fact that we needed to eat the sacrifice with the herbs, maror, this is also specific to Pesach. Now, what does that mean? And before, that's the question, like what can we get, like really, what can we get from that? That's number one. Number two, point number two, is that Pesach, and there is a text that I brought here, also a pretty long text. It seems when you read the story, when you read the history, it seems like there is history. The people of Israel got to Egypt and they got out with the 10 plagues. And because they got out, we do Korban Pesach. And the Korban Pesach, we need to remember the fact that we got delivered out of Egypt. But there are some texts that are talking about, for example here, it's a text, it's a midrash. So midrash, it's the midrash is kind of like an allegorical type of understanding of the Torah. It's not part of the Torah, but they talk and they explain the Torah with stories that usually are very, very difficult to understand. The stories are pretty strange. And here in that story, in that midrash, it starts by talking about about Adam and Eve. And the way it talks about it, I'm not going to get into the details. I'm not going to read the text, but he's describing Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, so what we associate usually with paradise. And he's describing the Nachash, which is the snake, right, as getting an order from God to go and have babies with Eve. And so he does a whole discussion, when at the end of the discussion, what seems to appear is that the famous story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, eating like a fruit from the tree and all of that, actually what really is behind that is like the fruit of the tree is actually a sexual act. And the snake, it's not like the snake gave an apple or a fruit to Eve, but it actually had relationship with her, and he also had relationship with Adam, and Eve had babies with him. And so the first two people coming from Adam and Eve, which is Cain and Abel, Cain and Abel, according to that story, which we need to understand, they were the babies of the snake. And so he goes through all of that like story, and basically Adam is represented as somebody who is kind of like very passive, who could not have a relationship with his wife, who could not have like who saw his wife having babies with somebody else, with the snake. They also saw that the ride of the snake was actually Samael, which is the angel of death, and it's a very strange story. All of this to say that in the continuation of the story, there is this very famous sacrifice. The first sacrifice in the history described by the Torah is the sacrifice of Cain and Abel. I'm not sure how we say Abel in English, but Abel, I think we understand. So Cain and Abel decided to do a sacrifice, and there is this famous story when the sacrifice of Abel was accepted, but the sacrifice of Cain was not accepted. So Cain got jealous, and he killed his brother Abel. And so that's one of the famous story of the Torah. But what the Midrash here, the allegorical explanation in his description on how Gan Eden was and the snake and all the sexual relationship, what he says also, he said that basically the Igia Yom Tov Shel Pesach, so the holiday of Pesach came, and Adam, Amar Lahem Adam, Lebanav, Adam told his sons, Balayl Zeh, this night, Atidin Israel Le'akriv Korbanot, in the future Israel will sacrifice sacrifices for Pesach, so you should also do a sacrifice on the honor of Pesach. And so the question is like, okay, what does the Midrash want to tell us by telling that? And what comes to mind, one of the things that comes to mind, is that how come they knew already this is like the creation of Adam? So we're talking about 2,000 or 3,000 years before the actual getting out of Egypt. And this is not even the real years, like in the real years, in the way we see them, it's millions of years, But time is a strange thing that doesn't really have full-on grasp or understanding. It doesn't go the way we think about. But however, no matter what, we see that way before, he was already saying it's Pesach. So it seems that on the classical view that Pesach is an event or a holiday that we do in order to commemorate or to remember a historical event, that seems to not be the case. It seems that it's the other way around, actually. It's like, and this is one of the things that we see in many times in Judaism. is that the events that are happening around a holiday are not defining the holiday, but the holiday is defining the events. So basically, because it was Pesach, because Pesach is a time of delivery, of getting free, because Pesach has this like, I don't know, we can call like this kind of like cosmic alignment of planets and all of that, the history go around, so it happened in a way that we can see Pesach. We can see the event. It's as if instead of looking at holidays as like a consequence of the event, it's the other way around. The events are a consequence of the holiday. So the time of Pesach existed way before the people of Israel actually got out of Egypt, way before they even got into Egypt, way before any of that. Pesach existed. And the idea of Pesach, the concept of Pesach, existed. So that's one thing that we can see from that. And it's very, this idea by itself, just the start of the thing, but this concept by itself is very powerful and very important to think about because it changes the perspective of things. It's the idea, in other words, it's like, what is the spiritual message that is behind Pesach that the historical events help us understand? So basically, we need to understand something, and the history help us understand it. And the history happened in a way so we could spiritually understand or live the idea of Pesach. Meaning that in some ways, if we could be at a level that we could understand and connect to the spiritual learning that we needed, we didn't need the history to look the way it looked. So we didn't need, sometimes you don't need things to happen because you understand it. Like in the spiritual realm or even in your personal realm, we can do comparison later. But sometimes your life needs to bring you to a point that you will understand that. But you could have understand it way before, and you could have changed totally the direction of your life because the lesson is learned. So the idea that we have lesson to learn, we have spiritual lesson to learn in our personal life, in the history of the world, as a people, as humanity as a whole, whatever, we have lessons to learn. If we don't know how to learn them, events will teach us. But if we somehow we learn how to understand them, how to learn them, we can change the course of event. The events are accessories, basically. So we don't need the accessories if we get the point. But the accessories are used to help us understand the point. So anyway, I think that's that's kind of clear. But the idea is, okay, now what is that lesson? What is the message that we need to learn? What is the message that even Adam and Cain in the Gan Eden already kind of learned themselves because they wanted to honor that day? So they got that message. They got the spiritual connection. And so it's clear so far, the kind of like question or introduction or yeah? Okay, cool. And so another text that I wanted to brought in order to keep the question is that usually the way we see Egypt beyond the historical facts and everything is like, okay, they were enslaved, they were working really, really hard, and it was very, very difficult to be a Jew in Egypt. And it sounds like it's a place that everybody wanted to escape. But in fact, when you look at the text and everything, first, I mean, that's an idea that I think we know, not everybody escaped. Only 20%. So 80% stayed in Egypt. So it's possible that this 80% didn't want to get out or didn't see the miracles as miracles. I'm not sure, but the fact is like only 20% escaped. And within the 20% that escaped, time and again, when they were out of Egypt and they went to Israel, they would complain at every step, and they will talk about Egypt as if it was paradise. So, for example, here I just took like a text, but there are many texts like that. The riffraff, that's, I don't know if it's a word in English, but I guess it is. The riffraff in their midst, it's on my traduction, so I guess it is, in their midst felt a gluttonous craving, and then the Israelites wept and said, if only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish that we used to eat free in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. So it's very strange because if Egypt was, sometimes they describe Egypt as like a place that they had so much work, they had so much pressure, they had so much like misery and everything. They would use their own kids as bricks because if they couldn't finish to build what they had to build, they would get killed. So some description of Egypt are totally horrible. It's like concentration camp. And at the same time, sometimes in the Torah you see that. So it's like, can you imagine somebody who comes out of like the Holocaust and be like, "Oh, I remember the good fish that I had in the camp," and it's like something is strange here. And it's not the first time. There are other places in the Torah that they say, "Oh, we missed Egypt. It was the land of milk and honey." You know, usually it's Israel, but oh, we miss Egypt. It was the land of milk and honey. Or I don't know. There are multiple example of that. And so, what does if I try to bring things together, the one of the ideas that we can have is that there is a parallel that can be made between Egypt and the Garden of Eden, so paradise, because the Midrash, the allegorical story, was talking about Adam and Eve. First, there is a parallel that can be made between the two. Second, it's not really clear if Egypt was a great place where you can eat fish for free and cucumbers and leeks and melons and all of that, or if it was like a place that was like actually hell with a lot of work. And third, it's not like what is the message that we want to understand from all of that and how we can apply it today. So from all of this, what comes out from all the text and all the text is that basically Egypt, or the passage in Egypt, it's a way for the people of Israel to learn some lessons. And the lesson that they needed to learn was to understand freedom, but to understand freedom in a way that even like the first man in the Garden of Eden, in some ways did not understand that freedom. There is a parallel that is made between being slave in Egypt and being in paradise in the Garden of Eden. And there is a similarity in both, that on one hand, Adam got kicked out of the Garden of Eden. In some ways, he didn't want to stay there. He was not finding himself in the Garden of Eden. And we see that by the story of the Midrash that talks about the snake that that was having relationship with Eve and that was kid with Eve. So in some way, it seems like Adam did not find his place in the Garden of Eden. And therefore, he decided to get out of the Garden of Eden in order to have his place, to find his place. And in the same way, the people of Israel in Egypt, some of them at least, did not find their place in Egypt, but at the same time, they didn't find their place outside either. When they got out of Egypt, they were still complaining, they were still missing Egypt. So the idea that comes out of all of that is that one of the lessons that needs to be learned from Egypt and from the Garden of Eden is that when we are coming on earth, we have an inability to connect to reality the way it is. And the fact that we cannot connect to reality the way it is makes us use all different type of interfaces and artifacts in order to relate to reality, to relate to others, to relate to reality the way it is. And that's okay, but the problem is that when we get too much into the interface, we lose connection with ourselves and we lose connection with reality. And it seems to be that this is what Egypt represented. Egypt represents yes, slavery and misery and all of that, but at the same time, it was their way to connect to reality. So it's like they were slaved, but first they may not even know that they were slaved. They were suffering and all of that, but they didn't know that there was another modality of existence. They didn't know that you could be connecting to what is, connecting to reality without the work, without being slaves. They didn't know something else existed. So they had to to be educated through a series of plagues and miracles, which are basically a ladder of ascension, of spiritual ascension, so they could disconnect from the fake reality that they thought was the reality. So basically, Egypt, which represent the limits and the contour, because in Egypt in Hebrew is Mitzrayim. It's also we talk about Metzarim, which are the contour, which are the limits. It's basically the envelope that is between us and and reality. And that envelope, we can find it in anything that we do, because it's so difficult for us as human, and that's our work here, to connect to reality the way it is. So we, even when we connect to others, when we connect to ourselves, we connect to everything, we use devices, we don't have a direct connection with the real things. But we need to learn, the idea of Egypt is that we need to learn to connect to that. And from that, so we have the ascendant, the miracles. We need to learn how to look at miracles around us. We need to learn how to see that everything that we have is just an interface between us and the world. That's the message that we need to get from Egypt. And the idea that here some of them were looking at it back as if it was heaven and paradise is that it's so difficult and so hard to get out of the interface, to get out of the slavery that we are into, that we don't even see, that every step that we make out of it, we look back and be like, oh my God, I mean, it was not that bad actually. Maybe I can come back. But unfortunately, when you kind of like open your eyes, you cannot close them again. So you move forward, but every step is so difficult that every step they were looking back and be like, oh, it was not that bad. It's like every time you are removing a shelf that is separating you from the reality, when you remove it, it's really hard to remove it. And when you do the movement of removal, you grow, you move to the next level. And on the case of Adam in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden, it's the same. It's kind of the same idea, but in the opposite way. In Egypt, it's like the material world that is the interface. It is the material world, and everything that is in our reality, in this reality, that is an obstacle in between the real you and reality. In the Garden of Eden, it's in the level of ideas. You have no connection with the reality. It's the other extreme. You have no connection with reality, but yet, because we are humans and we have these two sides, one side on earth very connected to real things, and one side a spiritual side. If you're too much into the materialistic side, you're in Egypt, you're enslaved. If you're too much in the spiritual side, you're in Garden of Eden, you're not slave, but you do not have a touch to the real, to reality either. You don't have touch to your human side either. And so you feel like you're Adam, you feel like you cannot do anything. You cannot connect to your wife, you cannot connect to the elements around, and the only thing you want to do is to get out of there. That's why Adam decided to like do what we call the sin, but basically is decide to experience reality. So on one side, Egypt is the epitome of materialistic world. If you're too much into it, you're not happy. On the other side, Garden of Eden is the epitome of the 100% spiritual world, but your body is not, your human side is not happy either. So the idea is that we get out of Eden to the materialistic world, we go to Egypt, and we get out of Egypt. We need to find kind of like a middle ground where through the experience of reality, we can still be connected to our spiritual side. And that's, I think, one of the biggest idea behind getting out of Egypt is that we need to learn. We learn the tools to get out of the everything that limit us, everything that is too materialistic, that doesn't let us get in touch with reality and with our spiritual side. So that's in big the idea of Egypt. And the way we connect ourselves, because this was back then as a people, they needed to learn that. We are, as a people, we are learning that. It's a process. Every generation is learning something, is letting go of some of their Egypt and is moving to the next level, to the next level. So every generation is moving. That's as a whole. But in our personal life also, every year, every time, every day, because Egypt is so present. Getting out of Egypt, the idea of Egypt is not only Pesach. Every day, when we do Shema Israel, we talk about the fact that we got out of Egypt. Every Shabbat, when we do the Kiddush, we do that. Shabbat is to remember that we got out of Egypt. So it comes back all the time, all the time, all the time. The central point that I think they want us to understand is that we need constantly to get out of our own Egypt, and Pesach is a magical time that is very like everything is aligned in a way that we have this power. We have the power to connect and to free ourselves from a layer that limits us, and that's why that everything happened around Pesach. That's why when they talked in the Torah at the beginning, they started with to say you're going to sacrifice the Korban Pesach from the very first day of the month and not just a few days before, because there is like a cosmic, like it's not just like a time, it's not random. There is kind of like cosmically everything is aligned. So there is in the air there is something that help us, get into like this state of mind of getting free. So I think in Pesach what we need to do personally, when we're going to get to the Seder and we're going to eat the matzah, we're going to drink the wine, we're going to have the beautiful food and the wine and everything that we're going to do, it's a very good time to think about what do I need to let go of? How can I connect to myself a little more? How can I connect to somebody else a little more? How can I, and the same idea of connecting to reality, but how can I grow spiritually and let go of something? Pesach is all about letting go, getting free of something. And getting free and letting go of materialistic things usually. That's how we can connect more to the other side. And it's a good time to look backward, to look at last year or a few years before, whatever it is. It's a very good time to do this type of exercise of realizing that it's like growing in some way, like you spiritually grow and you see a thing that you don't want anymore, the thing that you used to be like extremely attracted by this and that, and now this year it's starting to go away slowly, maybe. Or maybe you want things to go away. You're like, oh, I don't know why I'm so attached to, I don't know, to having beautiful shoes or a beautiful shirt, and why I'm mad at myself because I'm spending too much money on on this or that. That's like very basic example. I don't know, everybody has his own things, but these things, if you feel like, okay, it's too much, I want to get detached, that's a good time to start. On Pesach, it's a good time to at least bring awareness and be like, okay, I need, maybe it's good to detach from that thing, from that materialistic things, because it keeps me enslaved. The idea is that all this stuff are keeping us enslaved, that we don't even see it. We don't even see it because many times what keep us slave, we actually like it. I think we all have experiences where sometimes we feel like we're spending too much time maybe on social media or too much time on Netflix or whatever it is. And that could be our Egypt. If somebody is watching way too much Netflix and you feel like he's losing connection to others or to his family, I don't know what it is. That this Netflix could be your Egypt. So when you look at Netflix, some people will be like, I love Netflix. It's amazing. It gives me some peace of mind, some quiet time. And for some people, it is true, and that's perfect. But maybe for some others, Netflix is their Egypt. So some people will look at it as like the place where they had meat and free fish and whatever, because it's still paradise for them. But for some others, the same paradise is hell. And it's the same for paradise. Some people will see something that is like, it's amazing, that's blah, blah, blah. I'm glowing into that thing. And for some people, they're like, yes, okay, but it's not concrete enough. I need more experience. I need to get out. So in both sides of the balance, whether it's hell or paradise, whatever, the idea is that we control in our mind what it is, and it's depending on who we are. So everyone is different. We need to be into a, well, it's not like we need, but the idea of Pesach is that one of the idea of Pesach is that it's a good opportunity to get in check with yourself and to look what seems to be paradise, what seems to be hell for you, and why it's hell and why it's paradise, and what in this scope of hell and paradise you'd like to let go in both ways in order to connect more to yourself. And then an example of something that may look like, somebody could love reading beautiful books and literature and poetry, and that's sweet and that's beautiful, that's paradise. But maybe by reading too much, you're not connected enough to other human beings, or to your spouse, or to even just to yourself, or you cannot. All of a sudden, you don't think for yourself because you're immersed with too many poetry, and you don't find yourself in that. That could be seen as paradise, but maybe for you it's like it's not good anymore. I need to let go a little bit of that. Maybe I will read less poetry, and I will go out more in nature to just breathe the air and do something more simple that is more grounding. So when you go too high, sometimes you need to be grounded. When you're too grounded, you need to go a little high. So we need to find the balance. And Pesach is a good way for that. And the matzah, eating the matzah, which we did with every sacrifice. The matzah is the idea that it's like bread, except that it doesn't go up, and that it cooks really, really fast. There is an idea of time and space. So one of the idea of the matzah is that ultimately, everything that I said about hell and all of that, we need to start somewhere, and we need to start to think about that, and we can apply that personally to grow. But at some point, there is also the idea that time and space themselves, the dimension that we live, are also somewhat, can be seen also as kind of like a limit. And we need to disconnect also, or we can disconnect also from the idea of space and time to get, at least for the time of Pesach, to get into the matzah state of mind, if you want. When things don't matter much about time, don't matter much about space. When you go back to something that is the essential and the simple aspect of things, and this simplicity sometimes is found in a dimension that is beyond space and time, like the emotional dimension, sometimes the spiritual dimension. So letting go of the attachment of things that takes time and the attachment of things that take space. That's an idea of the matzah. One of the way to do all of that, and that's one of the key point of Pesach, is through telling the story. Because today that we don't have sacrifices anymore, what replaces sacrifice is prayers and it's story. The word sacrifice in Hebrew is the korban, which is to get close. I don't know why it's actually translated as sacrifice, but really the real meaning is to get close. And today that we don't have the act of killing animals and everything, the way that we get close to ourselves, to God, to others, is through talking, through communication. And so in Pesach, the Haggadah, which means the story, or telling the story, is the way that we are going to get into this whole state of mind. So by telling the story again and again and again and again and again of how we got out of Egypt, the miracle that happened of Egypt, all the plagues and how God came and all of that, by telling the story, by talking about the story, by explaining the story, by doing that again and again, somehow, I don't know exactly how it works, but it works. After time, years after years, we are. It's as if we're getting out of the space and time system the way we know it, and we're getting into a different dimension where the story happened. It's as if the story of Pesach was something that was happening all the time, every time, constantly in some other dimension. And we are there in a dimension that is into space and time, but by telling that story, we can connect to that. By telling again and again and again and again, by talking together with each other, by bringing all of the events and by interpreting them in the way that calls to freedom, that calls to hope, that calls to like getting out of slaveries and everything, all of a sudden, all of our life is turning into this analogy. And we're starting to see everything that happened to us as an example or a different case of the archetype story of Egypt. And it's kind of like almost as if something magical was happening. It's like all of a sudden you tell Egypt again and again and again, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, but yeah, my Egypt is, I don't know, my addiction to cigarettes. And my Egypt is my addiction to my phone. My Egypt is, and it just happens naturally. And by saying that over and over and over again, you start to have this archetype story. And then around that archetype story, you have your life story. And you see similarities. You see, and somehow you're getting out of your own life and you get attached to something that is way deeper, or not way deeper, but that is in a different dimension, and that helps you with your own life, finding the similarities and the way that you can improve and that you can get into that level. Um,
This is
yeah,
beautiful.
I don't know. I feel like it was all over the place because I didn't have my
No,
things.
actually, I
Yeah,
felt like it
because
was
I
not
think,
all over the place.
yeah,
No?
it's not all over the place at all.
Wow. Okay. Perfect. Beautiful.
I felt like you had a beautiful direction, and
Yeah.
yeah, I mean it's a beautiful way to interpret Pesach. I think I had heard a little bit about this image of like we're all slaves of something, and we should try to figure out what we're slaves of and try to enslave us um, during Pesach, like to actively do that. But I think I love this, the what you brought about this like story. If we keep telling the story, we're going to believe it, and we're going to be connected to the sort of like dream in some ways, right? I mean, we would feel like we're actually in it, really.
Yeah.
um I think I really love that. And yeah, the parallel between one extremity is Gan Eden, which is like too spiritual. And we don't have, we don't own clothes, we don't own anything, there's no material. And then the other end is Egypt, and it's too materialistic. And with the things that we would remember in Egypt is like material things,
Mm.
like the fish, the cucumbers, the melon. Um, yeah, it was really beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Oh,
And I
so
love
cool.
what I
Thank
really
you.
love what you said about the events and the lessons, and that the events are here not just because they are events, and they are here to teach us lessons, but the lesson is here prior to the
Mm.
event. And we know that very well because we all know that, oh yeah, we need to enjoy life and we need to enjoy days as if it was the last day of your life. But sometimes you need, like, we need like a dramatic event to learn that lesson. And so it's I found it like pretty powerful to think about that the other way around. So
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I agree. It's super powerful because it's like, okay, how can I know I learn? It gives also kind of like sort of freedom of choice because sometimes we see the
mm,
events are set, but the events are
yeah,
not set. The lesson they need to learn. How you're going to learn them, this is up to you somehow. So if you learn the lesson before, then the event you don't have. But anyway, yeah, it's a cool idea for sure.
yeah, I love
Yeah.
it.
I have to drop because I'm late to a meeting.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Thanks so much for
But
coming.
Nat,
Thank you so
this
much.
was so beautiful. Pesach
Yeah,
Kesha V'Sameach. We have a lot to
Beautiful
think
Pesach.
about and to
Amazing.
reflect on. Thank you so, so much for sharing this beautiful learning.
Thank
yeah.
you.
Share the
Mwah.
recording. I'm sure people will watch it actually. So
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I'll do the recording. Thank you so much
thank you so
for
much.
being
Thank you,
here. Have a
Nat.
beautiful Pesach, all of you. Miss you
You
all.
too. Bye, Estelle.
Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.
Mwah.
Bye, Leah.
Bye.